I'm going to show you how powerful this Bone Spear build is with two clips that showcase its potential. The first clip is of a kill of Uber Lilith that demonstrates the upper limit of what Bone Spear is capable of. Each cast of Bone Spear here is doing about 20 million damage, and it's super spammable. This damage is absolutely wild, and it's definitely the highest damage in the entire game once you get the build fully online. But what does Bone Spear's damage look like while you're still getting the build together and don't have perfect gear? Well, in this clip you can see that I am level 60 and I'm easily clearing World Tier 4, easily smashing through elites. These elites, keep in mind, are 13 levels higher than me, and my gear is very bad, plus I'm missing several aspects because I was power leveled up to 50. So, after playing only 10 levels, which took me like 5 or 6 hours, this is the power level I was able to get to. This build is absurdly good for leveling as it has massive damage, is ranged, which makes it very easy to stay alive, and it's super easy to assemble. So how is it that this build is able to do so much damage in the early game and scale into a late game powerhouse? Well, in my opinion, there are three main reasons this build is so powerful, which are Bone Spear's incredible base damage and legendary aspects, Bone Spear's access to critical strike chance and critical strike damage, and finally, insane scaling from maximum essence. Let's jump into each of these categories and go over the best ways to take advantage of these mechanics. The base damage of Bone Spear is unmatched by any other core skill in the game. It has a base damage value of 80%, and then it creates 5 shards that each do an additional 25% weapon damage. This means a level 1 Bone Spear is hitting for a whopping 205% damage. To achieve this incredible damage, it's important to play around the shards as you want all 5 shards to damage your primary target. There are 2 ways to do this. The first is to stand at the correct range so that your Bone Spear breaks right behind your target. This will cause all 5 shards to hit it before the shards spread out. The second way is to break your Bone Spear by hitting a wall. You can see in this clip that I am right next to the elite, but because there's a wall right behind the elite, he gets shotgunned from the spear breaking against the wall and he takes significant damage. To further increase the power of this shotgun effect, we are running the splintering aspect on a two-handed weapon, which causes our shards to do up to 225% bonus damage. This 225% is a bit weird because the base value of splintering aspect is only 100%, but for some reason we get an extra 25% if we put it on a two-handed weapon. On top of this massive damage increase, the aspect also allows us to keep 100% uptime on vulnerable. This applies to all enemies and even works in single target, and this adds to the consistency and wild damage output of the build. The second thing that makes Bone Spear do so much damage is its emphasis on critical strike damage and critical strike chance. In fact, this build can actually easily hit 100% crit chance while also having the most crit damage of any build in the whole game. So how do we get to 100% crit chance? Well, we get around 30% between our base crit chance, our rings, and our Paragon board. Then we get an additional 30% from having Aspect of Grasping Vines on our amulet, which we get this whenever we cast Corpse Tendrils. So we're already at 60% just from those few sources. Next, we get another 0.9% crit chance for every 10 essence we have on cast, and this is coming from our passive Serration. Because we're able to easily get over 200 essence, this essentially acts as a 20% crit chance increase, so with all of our sources we are now at 80%. The final 20% comes from Supreme Bone Storm, which just gives us a flat 20% crit chance while Bone Storm is active. And just like that, we're already at 100%, and we're starting to run into a problem of going over 100% crit chance, which personally I find to be kind of funny. The crit chance is great on its own, but to get full value out of it, we need to now find a bunch of crit damage multipliers, which luckily are very easy to get. Necro actually has a stat called Critical Strike Damage with Bone Skills, which can be found on rings, weapons, gloves, and from the Bone Graft and Scent of Death Paragon boards. You can roll multiple instances of crit damage on rings and weapons because of this. All of these crit damage sources are then added together for one massive multiplier. But Bone Necro also has access to some incredible independent crit damage multipliers. Aspect of Grasping Vines, Evulsion, Iron Golem Sacrifice, and the Aspect of Serration are all independent crit multipliers. This means that each of these sources multiply together, giving tremendous amounts of damage. It's very important to know that the Aspect of Serration is actually a multiplier, despite the tooltip saying that it's additive. The final major component of this build that makes it so powerful is its scaling off of maximum essence. Ossified Essence, which is our key passive, gives us 1% damage for each point of essence we have over 50, which ends up being a massive multiplier. We could easily get to 200 max essence between Paragon, Skill Tree, Gear, and the Shadow Mage Sacrifice, We can also get an additional 50 from an elixir, which puts us over 250 maximum essence. This means that we could easily have 200% increased damage from Ossified, as well as a 25% crit chance from Serration. You can start to see how Bone Spear does this wild damage when you combine its extremely high base damage, powerful aspects, guaranteed crits with massive multipliers, guaranteed vulnerability, and huge scaling off of maximum essence. Let's get into the meat and potatoes of what really makes this build work. The skill trees, aspects, all that good stuff. So let's start with skills. So we're going to be running Bone Splinters for our basic skill. This is going to be important for essence generation. That's why we're running a basic skill. And Bone Splinters has one of the highest essence generations per cast because of enhanced Bone Splinters, giving us extra essence as long as we have 50 or more when we cast it. And then the Acolyte's Bone Splinters is going to give us an additional 8% crit chance. 5 points into Bone Spear for big damage. And then Enhanced Bone Spear is going to give us shards. And then Paranormal Bone Spear is going to give us additional shards and gives us 5% increased crit chance. So Paranormal gives us 5%, and then we're getting 8% from Acolytes. So if you noticed in the previous section, we didn't discuss this. So basically, as the build evolves, you're going to be min-maxing your gear and stuff, but you're not going to be starting with perfect gear. But at some point, when your gear is perfect and you're playing it perfectly, you're actually going to be overcapping on crit. And when it comes to that, then you're going to look to roll different stats on your rings, and you're going to need to lower your crit chance because you're going to be overcapping it heavily. But moving on, so Unliving Energy is just going to give us 9 maximum essence, which is just crit chance and damage, as we discussed. And then Imperfectly Balanced is just going to give us a flat 15% damage multiplier, but at the cost of Bone Spear costing more essence. This cost we're able to pay because of a bunch of different stuff, and we're also reducing its cost from our Amulet and our Boots, which we're both rolling essence cost reduction on. And then this Aspect of Exposed Flesh is constantly generating essence because enemies are always vulnerable. And in large packs, it's really easy to sustain essence and keep it capped. And in single target, it's decently easy, but you're definitely going to have to mix in some Bone Spears. Some Bone Splinters to keep up those values. Blood Mist is our first competitive slot, so we can either run Blood Mist or Corpse Explosion here. The reason you would run Blood Mist is because it's much better for defense, and it's our only access to Unstoppable in the build. So Blood Mist is you can move around in it, you're immune to damage, and you can use it while CC'd to break out of CC. So it's extremely useful. It also its cooldown is being reduced constantly every single time one of your spears overpower, which is quite nice. And then finally, it's making corpses for us, which are really useful, both for our Bone Storm, which we'll get into in a minute, and for Corpse Tendrils, because Corpse Tendrils needs a corpse. So the argument for running Corpse Explosion over Blood Mist is the access to this passive Fueled by Death, which gives us a 9% damage multiplier after we consume a corpse. The corpse consumption right now is coming from the Osseous Gale aspect, which causes our Bone Storm to eat corpses, but this isn't going to be nearly as reliable as Corpse Explosion. So for speeds, I would recommend that you swap Blood Mist for Corpse Explosion, but in general, Blood Mist is going to be a lot safer and easier to play. And then we're putting 1 point into Grim Harvest. This is just to get access to Fueled by Death. For our curses, we're going to be running Decrepify for the massive slow and damage reduction. This is really useful. And more importantly, though, is the cooldown reduction we get whenever we hit cursed enemies. This is a really big deal, as this will significantly increase the uptime on both Corpse Tendrils and Bone Storm. Amplified Damage is just giving us a flat 9% damage multiplier against enemies affected by curses, which should be all enemies, so it's pretty convenient. Death's Reach is just giving us another 12% multiplier to all distant enemies, and again, this is pretty much always going to be up, so it's perfect. We're putting 3 points into all of the Bone passives because these are just incredibly useful. Serration, we already talked about. It's going to give us a ton of crit chance. In the ballpark of 20 to 25% crit chance with 3 points. Rapid Ossification is going to give us significant cooldown reduction on Bone Storm. Extremely high value. Compound Fracture gives us increased damage after we crit 10 times with Bone Skills. This damage buff lasts for 5 seconds, so we're easily able to sustain this all the time. So we're always getting 15% damage from this. Evulsion is giving us a flat 18% critical strike damage against vulnerable enemies, and this is a multiplier. And we're critting every single hit, and all enemies are always vulnerable. So Evulsion is perfect. Corpse Tendrils is really important in this build because it groups enemies, it stuns them, and it locks them in place so that they can't approach you. And so you're able to, DPS them down after they get gripped in and they're CC'd. And it's also going to proc our necklace, the aspect of Grasping Vines, which is going to give us 30% crit and 90% crit damage as a multiplier. So loads of damage. You can argue, by the way, not to put these last 2 points into Corpse Tendrils. I like it. I think the slow is pretty nice. Just it makes it a little bit safer. And then the Plate Corpse Tendrils vulnerable application just makes it so that your first hit of Bone Spear, the enemy's already vulnerable. There's definitely an argument not to put points into these two. However, it's important to have 2 points into Corpse Tendrils because you're going to be getting 3 extra ranks from Corpse Tendrils, which will get you to a rank of 5. The reason that number 5 is important is because every additional rank that you put into Corpse Tendrils reduces its cooldown, and it's linear reduction all the way up until level 5, and then after that, you get less value for each point. The cooldown gets reduced by less for each point. So we just want to hit that 5 sweet spot and stop there. Our ultimate, like I said, is going to be Bone Storm. We're going to be running the 15% damage reduction because it's amazing, and then 20% crit chance because that's also amazing. There's 2 things that make Bone Storm really strong. The first is this aspect of Shielding Storm, which causes our Bone Storm to constantly give us a barrier for 5% of our base life, which is a lot of barrier for every enemy it hits, so this is really strong. And then the second thing is that the Bone Storm is going to be constantly eating corpses to increase its duration. It'll eat up to 8 corpses and get 8 extra seconds. And that's how we start to approach really high up times. It should be up like 75, 80, 100% of the time if you're in perfect scenarios. It depends on how many enemies you're hitting with Decrepify, but the uptime should be pretty damn high. For our key passive, of course, we're running Ossified Essence, and this is just going to give us a load of damage. Oh yeah, and then so standalone is just going to give us a flat 18% damage reduction, and then Memento Mori, this is going to hit our sacrifice bonuses, which is going to give us crit chance, crit damage, and maximum essence. So, you know, everything that we want. I just want to close by going over the Paragon board real quick. As usual, you can find a link to this board in the description. I'm just going to go over the main things you need to know. So we're going to be running Gravekeeper in the first tree. This is just to get the rare node bonus. There's generally not going to be enough corpses to get the 12% damage, but the rare nodes are going to give us extra tankiness and damage. And the first tree we're going to go to is the Bone Tree, the Bone Graft Tree. So in this tree, we're going to get lots of maximum fury, lots of crit damage, and some crit chance, maximum essence, all kinds of stuff. And for our node here, we're going to be going with Essence, which is going to give us even more critical strike damage, and Essence is going to give us a crit damage multiplier. So crazy damage. Moving on, we're going to be going into the Scent of Death tree. This is going to give us a whole nother load of crit damage and loads of armor, which is quite nice. And the node we're putting here is Amplify, which is going to increase the armor from the defensive nodes, and then it's also just going to give us a flat 10% damage from cursed enemies. Coming up here, we're going to go Flesh Eater, which this gives us 40% damage after consuming 5 corpses, which we're always doing. So this is just a permanent 40% damage pretty much. And we're grabbing all of these damage to elites, which is quite nice. It's just nice to have. Elites are always the hardest thing to kill, so it's just some nice damage. And then here we're getting a flat 10% damage multiplier from Sacrificial Glyph. And we're also getting a 30% bonus to the magic nodes. Well, obviously it's a lot higher than 30%, but you know, this will give us tankiness and just more elite damage, which is nice. Getting even more armor. And we're coming over here and then getting all these resistances, damage reduction over time reduction, tankiness. Overall, this is a very tanky tree. We have lots and lots of armor, lots of resistances, and also the damage from this tree is wild because of the amount of crit and max essence that we get. Hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I hope that I've convinced you that Bone Spear is completely busted if you weren't already convinced of that. But yeah, I'll see you guys in the next one. Don't forget to like, comment, sub, all that. Check out our streams. You know, peace out.